Hello, and thank you all for joining us today for our web conference, The Risks of Globalization, hosted by Supply and Demand Chain Executive Magazine. My name is Barry Hochfelder. I'm the editor of Supply and Demand Chain Executive. Our mission is to provide intelligence and decision-making information for executives and management professionals as they enable their supply and demand chains for competitive advantage. So it's our pleasure, as part of that mission, to present today's web conference. This will be an interactive conversation with 4 panelists from our sponsoring companies. Amber Road, a leading provider of global trade management solutions. Axway, which provides market-leading software and services to help govern the flow of data that drives business-critical interactions. BROWZ, which has provided supplier qualification and management solutions since 2001. And Sparta Systems, which offers its customers a complete global quality management software solution, including the on-site solutions delivery support required throughout the project lifecycle. And we'll take some of your questions during the event rather than at the end, so be sure to enter them in the question box on your screen. Now let me introduce our panelists. Scott Burns is Vice President, Marketing at Amber Road. He's spent the last 20 years in sales and marketing roles with software companies and professional services firms. Roger Gassman is B2B Business Line Lead North America at Axway. He provides strategic direction and market insight to help Axway design solutions that meet the continually evolving requirements of the supply chain industry. Aaron Rudd is Vice President of Business and Product Development at BROWZ. He has more than 15 years of experience, including a leadership role at BROWZ since 2003. His depth of expertise, coupled with client focus, enables BROWZ to create configurable solutions implemented globally by many large organizations. And our fourth speaker, David Hardman, is Product Manager at Sparta Systems. Dave has more than 20 years of experience in the pharmaceutical industry, working in computer compliance, automation, and information technology. He currently is responsible for Stratus, Sparta's cloud-based supplier quality management solution. As I noted earlier, we want this to be an interactive forum, so please submit any questions you have by using the question box on your screen, and we'll try to answer as many as possible. If we can't get to it, it'll be answered via email after the live event. And please note also that we will have an archived version of this seminar posted on the Supply and Demand Chain Executive website at www.sdcexec.com. And you should be able to see all the slides from the seminar on that archived version, which will be up in about 24 hours. I'll also repeat that URL for you later. We all know visibility throughout the supply chain is vital. Whether you're manufacturing offshore or shipping your goods to other countries, what are the risks and challenges to your supply chain and your business? What do you know about regulatory issues, compliance, even the customs of other countries? What you don't know can kill your business. Okay, let's get going. I'd like to go around the table first and have each panelist answer this first question. What do your clients and customers say keeps them up at night? And does that in turn keep you up? Let's start with Scott Burns of Amber Road. Scott?
Yeah, thank you very much. You know, in the realm of global trade management, the thing that keeps people up at night is the dynamic nature of trade regulations. These regulations are unique by country and product. They govern both the movement of products into and out of countries, and they can literally change on a daily basis. And for companies doing business in 5, 10, 20, or even more countries, with a fairly diverse product line, trying to ensure that every line item on every shipment adheres to the most up-to-date trade regs, that's a very daunting task, especially when the penalties for violating trade regs are so severe. Just to give you a sense for the scope of the challenge, Amber Road, we employ over 100 full-time trade compliance professionals around the world. These folks are dedicated full-time to monitoring, interpreting, and codifying trade regulations for over 165 countries. And last year alone, they made over 13 million regulatory updates to our system. So, you know, with that as the backdrop, you know, the scope and the notion of somebody kind of keeping track of all these regs is quite daunting.
It looks like we might have lost Barry, so why don't I take the reins here and pass it off to Roger.
Hi, appreciate that. Somehow I dropped off. I'm back on now. So thank you for hopping in there and covering for me. What?
Hello, this is Roger.
Yeah, Roger, I can hear you.
Okay, great. I'm sorry.
Why don't you run with it?
Yeah, if I were to respond to what keeps our clients up at night, if I had a supplier manufacturer point of view, I think there's a couple of major categories. One being their daily operational challenges, and the next one being their long-term strategic concerns. If you look at their daily operation challenges, obviously we're always trying to mitigate any disruptions in the supply chain. And when you go globally, you find that those disruptions, can follow you around the clock. Unable to meet your commitments to your customers and your suppliers. Basically SLA compliance, missing delivery windows or lost payments in your data stream, not being able to respond to a customer in a timely fashion. There's hard costs associated with that. If you're not unable to process an order, or you lose some data, you've got people in the warehouses running overtime to pick, to pack, the shippers. You got penalties with showing up late for suppliers or for retailers that might turn you away. So there's quite a bit of risk on the daily operational side that is going to keep you up. And I've heard customers make comments that they say, look, moving data or moving our orders globally around the world securely is fine. That's easy today. It was hard 5-6 years ago. It was harder. But today we lose data from this end of my data center to that end. And we got to make sure that our processes are streamlined and they're efficient as possible so that we don't shoot ourselves in the foot. Then from a strategic concern, they really want to know how they're going to transform their supply chains. They want to be a disruptive force. They want to have differentiation in the market, and they want to stay profitable. They want to do this. They want to make sure that their supply chains, their IT technology, EDI, B2B, is helping them meet those goals for their expansion and innovation into mobile, payment security, different things. But in the end, what keeps them up all at night? Profitability. Making sure we're doing this as efficiently as we can and protecting the bottom line.
Okay, this is Barry. I'm back, and I apologize. Not sure what happened. We're in a technological age, I guess. Have all four speakers answered that first question?
No, only two. This is Dave Hardman. I'll take the next go.
All right.
They're really the biggest problem for our customers is really where is that risk of poor quality. For 20 years, we've provided software that gives you a really great look to where the problems in quality are for your on-premise manufacturing sites or locations. And as our customers move more of their manufacturing to contract manufacturing organizations or suppliers that supply more of not just a raw material, they have a much greater exposure to the risk of poor quality. And today, they're managing that quality, but not in an efficient manner. So they're doing it by heroic efforts. And a lot of that data gets lost or it's not discoverable, and it ends up in shared drives or databases that aren't available across the enterprise. So really, they don't know where their risk of poor quality is and where they need to apply leverage to reduce that risk.
Okay. Great. And one more presenter to go.
Yeah, Barry, thank you. This is Aaron Rudd with BROWZ, and I appreciate you all hosting this today and glad to be a part of it. As I think through how BROWZ helps our customers solve some of the challenges that keep them up at night, It's great to hear the diversity of our panelists because I think we all have different angles of risk and exposure. For the customers we work with and the clientele we work with, the biggest challenges that keep them up at night are really keeping the people safe and healthy that in the environments that they work in. We spoke to a customer this week, and their biggest challenge right now within their supply chain is how do they reduce fatalities that have, first of all, loss of life. Second of all, the challenge that presents to ongoing production and ongoing projects, as well as it relates to brand protection, brand awareness. So the first level is really how do we help and how do we work with our clients and customers to ensure the safety of both their own employees and the employees within their supply chain. And then the second is a really related component to that, and that is when there are catastrophic events or how to mitigate the risk associated to those. What is the due diligence that's been done in supply chain management to ensure that risk has been mitigated to its greatest extent in the ability to demonstrate that due diligence. And those would be kind of the two key areas that we help our customers focus in. We do that through software and auditing services that help mitigate that risk.
Oh, okay, great. Thanks, Aaron. All right, now we're going to would like to ask you folks in the audience to see how you're handling your risk. I posted a poll for you. Please just take a moment and respond to it. How does your organization handle risk management in your supply chain today? A, we aren't doing anything. B, we have a few manual processes in place. C, we have both manual and automated processes in place. D, our process is mostly automated. E, our process is completely automated. And F, don't know. And I'll just give you a few seconds here, and we'll have a look and see if our panelists would like to comment on the results that we're seeing. Please just take a moment and click the box, and we'll move along. So we know that risk, everybody's got a risk, and it's going to happen. Something's going to happen. It's not when or what, it's when. So we really have to be prepared, and I don't think we can have a manual sitting in somebody's office anymore. It's got to be proactive. So let's go ahead and check our responses here. We aren't doing anything, 3.7%. A few manual processes in place, about 30.5%. Both manual and automated in place, 48, almost 50%, almost half of you. Mostly automated, 3.7, and nobody completely automated. Any surprises there, panelists?
Hi, this is Scott Burns. I would just say this is pretty consistent with the results we've seen, at least in global trade, from some of the industry analyst research that's been done. I think it's very rare, although it's people's ambition to fully automate and should be their ambition. A lot of people are combining manual processes and trying to get there on the automation, and it just takes a little time.
Yeah, this is Aaron with BROWZ. I'd also say that on the risk side, most environments have adopted a continuous improvement approach, recognizing that there's first stages of closing massive risk gaps, and then continuing to put procedures and processes and technology in place that helps from a continuous improvement perspective. So I would say some of those findings are also consistent with how people work to improve.
Yes, and Barry, this is Roger from Axway. Many times in our expectation or our experience with our customers, we'll see that there's always that diligence, that they're always trying to do their best to handle the risk and the compliance. But a lot of times there needs to be a significant incident, an event that causes a next level or a next major move into a risk and compliance program, that there was a data loss or there was a major disruption in the supply chain, that type of thing. So a lot of times it's a kick the can. We know it's there. We'll address it when we get there. But again, the incremental approach is definitely what we see as much as well.
Okay, great.
This is Dave Hardman. I would agree with that assessment. Many of our customers take the approach of addressing a problem when it becomes a problem, and the numbers that you have reflect that. In that this is something that's under the surface that aren't not enough people are taking notice of, and by understanding the level of risk, you can mitigate a problem going forward.
Okay, great. Let's move along now, and we'll talk a little bit about supplier risk. One of the major buzzwords in our industry is visibility, and clearly we all know what can happen when you don't have visibility into your supplier network, and we're talking tiers 2, 3, and 4, not just your main supplier. So let's start with David Hardman of Sparta. And how is supplier risk measured, and what are some of the tools that can and should be used?
Sure. I'm going to address supplier quality risk specifically, but what our customers are doing today is they're doing two things. The first is they're onboarding their key suppliers, and they're auditing them or getting a questionnaire or feedback before they're qualified, so that they're understanding the quality, their level of quality compliance. So that's one of the factors that goes into the risk score. And the second thing is that they're measuring how well they do at particular products. They may supply more than one ingredient or more than one service, and they'll measure and they'll look at the criticality of that particular product in the supply chain of the products that supplies. And then the last thing they'll do is they'll measure the quality responses and the timeliness of the quality responses, how many complaints they've had, how many product nonconformances, and they'll roll that up into an overall score. And then they'll use that to assess how well that company is performing.
Good. Let's go on then. Prequalification seems to be growing in popularity, so I'd like to ask Aaron Rudd of BROWZ to explain exactly what that is. Can a company do it by itself, or is third party required?
Thanks, Barry. Contractor and supplier prequalification really focuses at the upper part of the supply chain funnel, where you're trying to assess those suppliers and contractors prior to engaging them in a contract or a relationship, and ensuring that they have the ability to meet or exceed your standards. And not necessarily standards related to product quality or standards related to a project execution, but really company-level standards. Things like health and safety. Do they have health and safety management systems to ensure the safe practices of their companies? Are they properly insured? What financial stability do they have as a company? Are there any sort of outstanding bankruptcies or judgments or liens? Are they a diverse supplier? Do they have a specific category that's relevant for your geography that meets diversity requirements? A newer area and really a big growth is around corporate social responsibility. Can they demonstrate their adherence to human rights requirements, labor requirements, environmental and anti-corruption issues? Even in newer areas now in conflict minerals, some of the new requirements over the last 2 years as it relates to conflict minerals reporting. So really, in essence, are we evaluating our supply chains, suppliers and contractors to ensure prior to their engagement that they're going to meet not only our corporate standards, but best practices standards, globally accepted standards, and then your corporate standards prior to engagement. So that in a nutshell is a mouthful, but constitutes a lot of the areas of prequalification. It also gets to the training and qualification levels of employees. Can they demonstrate the training and qualifications of the employees that would be engaged? And can they do that prior to you engaging them? Those things we recommend get boiled out in pre-qualification out to a scorecard or out to a compliance status that helps you as an organization have visibility to that supplier company's score for engagement. And it also ensures that you've done that level of due diligence, that level of qualification to ensure that you can work with that company. Your follow-on question, Barry, really had to do with once you've moved, once you've established that, is this something that companies do themselves? I think even in the survey we saw that companies have a lot of processes in place, some of them very manual, some of them may have software automation to them. But overall, we've heard our customers say they have processes in place. They want to ensure that they have a level playing field for all of their suppliers and contractors, that they have proper brand protection for all of these different areas. And so questions that are relevant and the stakeholders that are relevant in this process really cover an entire organization, from the executive management through risk and legal, health and safety, operations, environment. And as they look at doing this themselves, I think the short answer is, can companies do this themselves? And the answer is absolutely yes. We're a company that helps companies do this, and as a third party, we think we do a great job. But in reality, I think one of the most important points today is that companies need to establish a culture internally of having this pre-qualification as a standard throughout the organization. Whether they use a third party or not, having a mandate internally, establishing appropriate standards by supplier type or risk level or geography or business unit is critical. You know, we work with some folks that would work perhaps in an environment where there's nuclear exposure. So the requirements for pre-qualification in that environment are going to be different than a manufacturing environment. So having a culture in which it's contractual. So pre-qualification is contractual. There's enforcement for that. And then internally, how have you trained everyone internally to engage suppliers and contractors? Internally, do you have employees that are going around the process, or are they utilizing the pre-qualification process? So some of these factors and some of these things I'm mentioning are critical for having a culture of pre-qualification, regardless of whether you use a third party or not. We've seen benefits in using third parties, such as you've got an objectivity in the evaluation process. So when you have incidences that you can demonstrate due diligence, not just with your own company's work, but you've engaged a third party to ensure objectivity, to bring best practices, to ensure that there's a core competency that may be brought from a third party that perhaps may not reside internally within your organization. So it can definitely be advantages to outsourcing, but it doesn't replace the internal culture that must exist. And finally, really taking it from just pre-qualification to annual requalification and working with compliance on an ongoing basis, and then concluding through that whole supply chain relationship to performance evaluations. How does that company perform, and how does that performance then impact their ability to do future work? I know, Barry, I've just spoken a lot and spoken quickly, but I think really the goal here is establishing a proper culture within your organization.
Okay, great. And I just want to stay with you for a moment here. And since we're talking the global supply chain, how can folks ensure qualification to compliance standards globally, where we all know how crazy it can get sometimes with differences both legally, culturally, and so on?
Sure. Good question. I'd like to break this answer down really into two categories, and others on the other panelists may have different experiences based upon their exposure. But one of the areas we work with are companies that have sites or operations in other countries or in a lot of different countries. And it's different when you're running or you're operating a site or a location in another country. It requires that you engage local expertise and local leadership that are aware of the health and safety, environmental requirements, that they're aware of the local regulatory standards that they must operate under. So if you're a site or you're an individualized location, you really have to understand the country, the culture, the regulations that you work within, and you need to understand those by competency. So what are requirements for health and safety, for environment, for those different areas. The second thing that we've seen our customers really implement, and I'm sure you all see that as well, and that are global corporate standards that apply really regardless of geography. And those global corporate standards really have to do in areas of corporate social responsibility, health and safety standards that are not just locally regulated, but we see some of our customers say, we're going to establish health and safety standards globally, and then they're going to have local implementation, but there's going to be corporate level standards. So working with corporate standards at a local level in those areas really are critical. What we find also in those localized environments is there's the hiring practices, insurance, diversity, even financial stability. Those are assessed a lot more on a local basis because there aren't always global standards or corporate standards that address that. And one of the challenges oftentimes in large organizations is you don't have all of the resources that you need, the purchasing resources that you might need at a local level to do that. So it becomes important to understand how you can have visibility to your supply chain with fewer resources at times. The first area is really that site when you have a site or operation. The second area is when you're dealing with suppliers or global suppliers that are supplying you with work, with product or those kinds of things, and you're not necessarily physically located in that particular country. I think that in that area, some of the same principles still apply, but what we've seen is a lot larger number of on-site audits that are required going into those environments, ensuring that you've done social and ethical auditing depending upon the country that you're in, that you've gone in for health and safety. What's the sustainability of that supplier? Do they have proper fire suppression and fire safety systems in place? And how do you address potentially having sustainability, not having just one supplier who supplies what you need, but having multiple suppliers so you're not solely dependent upon one environment? So the requirements and the standards are going to vary whether you have a site or a global supplier. Two final comments here I just want to hit on. A lot of successful environments will use subscription services to regulatory update providers that you can subscribe to country by country, and you can ensure that you're getting updated legislation and updated regulations. I know one of the other panelists on the call spoke about just the ongoing maintenance of those regulatory changes. So I think having subscribing to those different standards through third parties is critical. I think secondly, having a software management platform, a centralized dashboard and scorecard to have visibility of your supply chain is critical. And then lastly, again, having that culture of looking at both global standards and localized standards and applying them appropriately is critical in that process. And just for resources for those on the call, if you're in countries or environments where there is not strong health and safety standards in that country, you can use the ILO, International Labour Organization, as a baseline for some of those standards. In the corporate social responsibility or social and ethical space, the International Trade Center has established sustainable trade standards maps that can be utilized. And then also the United Nations Global Compact has different standards that can be done. So depending upon your look, there are a lot of different resources out there.
All right, good. Thank you, Aaron. All right, Roger Gassman of Axway, let's kind of continue in that vein. We have an often overwhelming number of compliance and regulatory issues to deal with in the U.S., and you've said that a one-size-fits-all approach just won't work. So what are some of the issues that arise when dealing with global business? For example, we can look at data, IT security, privacy laws. How do you make all of that work?
Well, that's the one-size-fits-all, basically your existing risk and compliance programs are doing everything they can today to manage all the requirements and the directives here in the U.S. And then they have to be adapted and educated and informed on how to manage this stuff outside of our borders, right? So when you look at some, for example, in the U.S. for PCI-oriented payments in the supply chain, maybe for freight payments, that type of thing, you'll see that just something that's overlooked would be, isolation of these payment programs or solutions, so that they're not on the same network as your basic B2B infrastructure or your common trading portals or things like this. You'll see that we're seeing quite a bit of the freight payers and the bill payers that are completely hardening these systems by and meeting the requirements by isolating them and having role-based access and a whole different set of a microcosm of new regulatory compliance procedures to make sure that they're complying with that. And when you talk about data at rest for HIPAA, for HR, benefits information, paychecks, payroll, different things like that, these are things that really come into play. So when you look at your existing U.S.-based EDI structures or your B2B environments or your portals, what have you, you may see that it doesn't fit at all. Not only from an IT standpoint, but from an operational standpoint. What are the risks about doing something so simple as or routine as opening a manufacturing plant in Latin America? What does that mean to risk for delayed on my just-in-time processing because I don't have my border information correct, or my customs papers filed timely and the shipment stopped at the border, or that we've got policies that have drivers go off their routes or they get there late and they trigger inspection. These types of things that if you don't have those GRC programs in place can really end up shooting you in the foot. When you look at data privacy, it's a huge issue. And the EU takes it very seriously, much more rigorous standards than we even have here. So when you start talking about, okay, am I going to be able to store this data on my infrastructure here in the U.S.? Am I going to store it in a cloud? Where is that cloud server? Am I allowed by law in the EU to store that data there? So, you've got to look at those concerns. You look at protocols. What type of support for protocols are required for doing business with the government, for doing business with the industry that you're trading with, or formats for documents that need to be sent through. So maybe my existing application here doesn't even support, say, AS4 for the gas industry supply chain in Europe, or it doesn't support this in-factor document for Latin America for clearing customs, different things like this. So this really starts to become a problem. And then you can even compound it by saying, okay, look, we've got a division there. We bought a small company. They have information on premise. They have their data there. They already have their solution and methods. But what happens there is that can add increased risk for non-integrated processes, gaps in your visibility throughout your supply chain, increased complexity in your whole process now, because you may, you've got to work with trying to access this system, and this one doesn't talk to that, and there's all kinds of problems that can come in through as far as introducing this. So we can talk a little bit more about that later if I get the chance, but there's quite a few things that you need to look at when you're talking about shipping products across border, not only just for compliance, but in the end, how is that going to impact my operations and the health of my supply chain?
Okay, great. Let me quickly remind folks out there listening, you've got 4 really solid experts here who can help you answer maybe some of your pain points and problems. So please go to the question box and ask your questions. And as I said before, if we can't get to them today, they will be answered via email after the live event ends. All right, let's go over to Scott Burns of Amber Road. And Scott, how can companies possibly stay on top of this dynamic regulatory landscape? Is automation the answer? Are there other routes they can go?
Yeah, I think I gave you a sense for the scope of the challenge when I talked about the number of regulatory updates our internal staff makes. And yeah, I mean, automation, ultimately what automation is designed to do is behind the scenes to perform these compliance checks on a line-by-line basis. For every single line that gets exported or imported, it's based upon a product and a country combination. And it's doing things like, am I shipping, is the person ordering this good on a restricted party list, meaning that they are a known terrorist or they have violated a Foreign Corrupt Practices Act or any number of reasons. Do I need an export license to ship this? Does this product have the appropriate classification code that uniquely identifies it for the company that's going to be importing it so it doesn't get stuck at customs? And so when you talk about every single line item for every single shipment and the kind of volumes that many of these multinational companies process, to the notion of doing that manually on an execution basis is just not realistic. So, that's where automation comes into play, and it performs these checks in the background. And if all goes well, it not only performs the checks, but it identifies and generates the appropriate international shipping documentation that should accompany each shipment. That will be unique by every single shipment based upon the country it's going to. And it's straight through processing. But, in the event that something is amiss, that an export license is required to ship this product, but you do not have that license on file or it's expired, it will flag the shipment, it will place it on hold, and it will alert the user that remediation is required in order for it to be shipped. So, that's where automation comes into play. And again, it's in response to a tremendous amount of volume, a tremendously complex environment with a bunch of regulatory checks. And that's what, at least for global trade management, that's where automation comes into play.
Great, thank you. And David Hardman, can you explain to us how risk and actions taken to combat them can be integrated?
Sure. One of the things that you're talking about, basically a feedback loop, right? So today, customers are really they're sort of in the dark. They're guessing as to where are my problems in quality because they're not they don't have real-time measurements. And so what we've tried to do, extend what we've done very well on premises to provide the ability to measure those events and assign a score, a risk score. But that's the first half of the equation. So now you've got a measurement, and you know your level of exposure. And now what do? So to mitigate that, the first thing that you would do is you would audit that supplier or that contract manufacturer to understand why the risk occurs. And today, so an audit is really broken into two parts, as everybody knows, is that you first have the execution, the audit, you come back with a set of findings, and then you need to take actions on those findings. So the tools today are really very, very manual. And what we've tried to do in extending our product is providing a portal or a method of integrating that process with the end suppliers. And so, the first step is to take action on the supplier that's at a high risk level. And the second thing is to change the status or find another supplier based on the data that you have in your system. So commonly, customers will have multiple sources for either a material or contract manufacturing. By maintaining and managing the data in a central repository, you're able to take actions by shifting from one supplier to another, one with much less risk. So it's really around measuring that risk level, mitigating it by auditing or providing a corrective action for a problem in the marketplace, and lowering that risk level, and then managing it by shifting from one supplier to another.
Okay, David, let me throw a question at you that just came in from one of our listeners, and can we hear a little bit more about supplier risk and the tools to combat it, especially in terms of visibility in the chain?
Okay, so I'll try to extend the answer from the first question. So the tools that we offer is the ability to integrate the existing on-premise processes. So whether it's a complaint, a nonconformance, or a corrective action that needs to be taken. Traditionally, our customers have used our product TrackWise very effectively in managing those and assigning the activities to lower the risk of poor quality. And what we've done with the Stratus product is to extend that on-premise action item change through a portal called Stratus that really makes them part of the organization. So the tools are really already there, but for supplier quality management, we're making them available to a much broader category of suppliers. Traditionally, it's been the tier 1 suppliers that get pulled in first, either as part of the onboarding process through an audit, and then subsequently with complaints that were coming from the marketplace or problems that occurred during manufacturing. And so the first step is to provide the output portion, or the transfer of information from the customer to the supplier. And the second part of that is really when you have a contract manufacturing organization or somebody that's much more deeply embedded in your supply chain or the supply of your materials, and providing them the ability to input or create items for you to evaluate. So it's really three sets of tools. One is the quality events that occur within your four walls that you can extend to your suppliers. The second is the audits that are performed on your suppliers, whether it's for environmental health and safety, whether it's for financial, or whether it's for quality, but providing the ability of them to input data as if they were in your systems into your quality management system. And then the last is really the complex events. So really the complaints that occur that need to be investigated by the contract manufacturing organization as part of the quality agreement. And then it's the non-conformances that occur in a contract manufacturing organization that need to be made aware, the customer needs to be made aware of as part of the quality agreement. And then the process of, really the end-to-end process of managing those events. So determining the root cause and a corrective action, and then finally the follow-up to see if those corrective actions had their intended purposes. So those are the tools that we provide today as part of the Stratus product. But it's really an extension of the EQMS or Enterprise Quality Management System that our customers use today.
Okay, great. Hope that answers it for our listener. In talking to supply chain professionals over the years, I've learned that indirect spend, especially MRO, can be an overlooked facet of an efficient and profitable supply chain. So Aaron Rudd, can you talk about the risk in indirect spend and maybe what can be done about it?
Sure. Thanks, Barry. That's really kind of one of the areas that BROWZ specializes in, is helping look at that MRO supplier and contractor, because there's some unique things with the risk associated to that part of the supply chain. Typically, those suppliers are not working in a company's core competency. So they're coming in, they're repairing equipment, they're repairing buildings, they're doing maintenance on structures. And so a customer is not necessarily in that business. They're in the business of manufacturing or producing something. So the first risk is that it's not their core competency, so what they're doing is they're outsourcing that to a contractor or supplier. So some of the risks associated to that, first is an exposure risk. When you bring a supplier or contractor on your site for MRO, you're exposing your employees to potential risk from that third party. You're exposing your community. If you work in a PSM regulated environment or an environment that has high exposure, you have to be aware that contractor or supplier could be exposing you to community risk as it relates to your processes. Those are two key things, your exposure. The second is really the risk of the task. If you're working in an electrical environment or you're working in confined spaces or you're working at heights, you may be engaged in a specific task that has a high level of risk associated to that. And so it's important when you look at a supply chain strategy and you look at evaluating your suppliers and contractors that you consider the exposure. Where are they going to be within your facility? What chemicals are they exposed to? Could they expose our employees? Could they expose our community? And then what is the task? Are they going to be working at heights that requires health and safety parameters and requirements? So how do you properly engage with that supplier up front in a pre-qualification process, ensuring you're working with safe companies? Secondly, once you've awarded a contract, how do you do proper job hazard analysis? How do you communicate to that supplier or contractor the risks that they will be exposed to at your facility? And then once they're on site performing that work, what sort of process procedures and monitoring do you have in place to ensure that risk has been mitigated? So those are key areas, and oftentimes for supply chain professionals, that's beyond the scope of where their involvement is. They've got to oftentimes involve other stakeholders in their organization, their health and safety department, their engineering department, other departments that can help and inform that process to mitigate that risk. So what we find are really key steps to solve that. One is pre-qualification. The second is having a dashboard that you can go to quickly and find a qualified supplier that can perform an mRNO feature or function for you that's already been vetted and vetted properly for your environment. Evaluate your contractors and suppliers based upon risk level. So, your janitors or your landscape companies may be evaluated at a lesser risk exposure than someone that's working and doing higher risky work. And then lastly, have accountability, have gate control in place so that prior to companies coming on site, you're doing a final check, not only to ensure that the company is meeting your standards, but the employee they're sending to your site has been properly trained and qualified. And then lastly, evaluate and monitor. Go out on site, perform performance evaluations, perform health and safety reviews, monitor their safety, and then record that back. Pull that back into your dashboard so that you're able to, in the future, make informed decisions about the contractors and suppliers you use on an ongoing basis.
Okay, great. Thanks, Aaron. Let's take another question here from our listeners, and we can leave this open to whichever of you would like to jump in with the answer. And it's a pretty important question, I think, for folks. What would be a recommended approach to adding a cost assessment to a measured risk so that senior managers can gather the importance of this issue? So I'm sure you've all probably got a thought on that one. So who's first?
So this is Dave Hardman from Sparta Systems. What we normally, this is a pretty short answer too, but what we normally do as part of the sales process is we provide a value evaluation tool that looks at the pieces of software that they're looking to purchase and what they can expect as far as a return on investment. Right? None of the things that we provide are done just because they're nice to do and it's a fun project. It's really all about reducing the exposure to risk and what we can expect the payback to be. So, whether it's a market action, which is something that's really extreme, where you avoid a recall or you want to prevent a recall, or it's something as simple as preventing a lot from being on hold. What we do is provide I would call it a spectrum of events that you can expect a reduction in as part of the implementation of our software solution.
Hi, this is Scott Burns. That's a great question. Of course, we get that question all the time, and one thing that I've found is, at least for senior management, it's much easier for them to identify with and acknowledge returns associated with supply chain improvements than it is risk avoidance, right? And I'm sure that's no surprise to anybody. What is the cost to me of incurring a fine associated with violating an export regulation versus what is the cost to me in cycle times and inventory levels associated with having those goods delayed in customs or having my supply chain slowed down. And what we find is the latter is much more real to senior management. What is the cost to me of not taking advantage of a preferential trade program like NAFTA or Mercosur or any of the 500 free trade agreements that exist out there in hard dollars is much more compelling. So we try to relate, and it's real, we're not fabricating, but we try to relate the risks mitigation in terms of supply chain improvements, and that seems to resonate much more.
All right, great. Let's go to Roger Gassman here. And Roger, what are some of the issues that arise when a company's business growth expands faster than the ability of its existing EDI B2B infrastructure to keep pace with it?
Well, I guess risks abound, I would say, when we talk about our growth outpacing our infrastructure. And specifically, when you look at supply chain today, there's many of us, probably even on this call, that would have an opinion the fact that the supply chains today are at max density. You don't have to look far to look at the capacity problems plaguing the ports in the Northwest. More container ships than lined up than they can offload. You look at Amazon a couple years ago and UPS with their issues of overwhelming their supply chain with arguably some poor supply chain planning on capacity and delivery dates and what have you. And you can look at the traditional tactical way of trying to solve this type thing. We see a lot of customers just stick with the status quo and try to solve it tactically, throw more iron at it, throw more software at it. We'll get more CPU, we'll get more storage for this network, for this EDI, and we should be able to handle this. Or we'll put up another solution over there in LATAM and another one over here, so we can just get it done. And then you'll find that introduces a series of problems that you end up dealing with, that it's Pandora's box in that respect. You'll see a lot of regression in your business processes, a lot of unnecessary complexity being introduced. We've actually seen customers where they say, okay, now since we've moved down to that faster, bigger solution down there in LATAM, we're going to onboard everybody there. But hey, we don't have an onboarding solution with that thing. So we're going to have to go back to manual onboarding solutions and delay time to revenue or value, if you will, in that relationship as you bring on customers and partners. When you look at the ability for the visibility, the lack of visibility in KPIs to measure the health of your supply chain, to measure the performance of your suppliers, and measure yourself against your customers. You lose that visibility with the disconnection, and then the business side, they're stuck with trying to make business decisions based on stale or incomplete or fragmented data that's not put together very tight. So it gets very complex with that. So when you look at trying to upgrade an infrastructure strategically, the people who are very successful are the ones that sit down with the planning and sit down with EDI ops and the business, and they look at the goals. Got an example of a global manufacturer of home home goods and appliances. They did just that. They looked at their business plan, where they wanted to go, and they realized they could not push the amount of orders and information and payments through their existing infrastructure or through their existing B2B and EDI operations. And they became, their own infrastructure became one of the major risks to the success of their business plan. So they basically took on an incremental transformation of their environment to be able to handle the capacity to support the business needs, not only for the existing supply chain and growth in the numbers, but for the innovation and the different things where they wanted to go, the new markets and the new technologies they wanted to impact and introduce into their processes. So in the end, one of the biggest barriers to that is, where do they start? You've got, my gosh, these translators have been running here forever. So-and-so is retired. We don't even touch that anymore. We've outsourced some of it now. A lot of times you don't even know where to start, and that's what Axway does. We come in, we help make sense of it, we help you with your strategic planning, and we help you get the value and the differentiation out of that environment to help you support this, so that you support your business plan. It's all about the bottom line, market share, and your brand identity, the strength of your brand in the market. That you do it better, faster, cheaper, and you return this value to your suppliers, and you're easy to work with, and what have you. So there's a lot that goes wrong when you start outpacing your ability to service your supply chain and your business.
Okay. Well, we're just about out of time, so I'd like to go around the table just one more time for one kind of vital but brief takeaway for our audience to keep in mind. And we'll start with Scott Burns of Amber Road.
Yeah, thank you. I think I'll wrap with a follow-on to my prior comments. Risk, takes many different forms, but I think at the end of the day, we at least assess risk in terms of how is it impacting, a company's business financially, and relating that to your operations and your supply chain. And global trade is a very complex, high volume environment, and we'd like to think that we can automate things and drive a financial returns tied to risk, that drive a lot of value for companies.
Okay, and Roger Gassman.
Well, I think when it comes to globalization and growing, we shouldn't be afraid of it, right? That's a good thing. The business is growing, that's what we do. The whole idea, everything we do every day is balance risk with operations, right? How much risk can we take on without sinking the ship if one thing goes wrong, all right? We need to balance risk with operations. And I would say from a standpoint from your infrastructure and EDI and B2B, you should look at your existing environments and find out if that's going to take you where you need to be. And if not, take a strategic approach to transforming your infrastructure and don't look at it as infrastructure. Look at it as something that you can use to be disruptive in the market, set a standard, make it be a differentiator for you in the market, and a power to your brand.
Great, thank you. And Aaron Rudd?
Yeah, thank you. I think the closing thought I have is really putting processes and procedures in place and technology in place that helps mitigate the risk associated with on-site contractors and suppliers. Specifically, not waiting for fatalities or massive incidences or major incidences to ensure that you've got a good due diligence plan in place, and ultimately drive continuous improvement in your contractor and supply chain by influencing. One of the great stories we hear from our customers is that they are seeing improvement in their supplier chain, improvement in life, improvement in injuries and accidents, improvement in delivery times, and improvement in project execution, because they're being held accountable to standards of pre-qualification and standards of ongoing compliance. And at BROWZ, we believe one of our strengths is helping provide software and services that help deliver that to companies on a global basis, and ensure that you have visibility not just at your Tier 1 levels, but at your Tier 2s and your Tier 3s, and ensuring you've done due diligence at those levels as well. So thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you, Aaron. And finally, David Hardman.
Sure. Thanks, Barry. So I think I'm just going to keep it short and just a few bullet points. I mean, the first thing is supplier quality is very important. And strengthening the relationship between the customer and the supplier not only benefits the customer, it ultimately benefits the supplier. And understanding the quality problems that exist help remove the risk or the exposure that you have to your product in the marketplace. And it ultimately benefits you and the supplier.
All right, great. We have a few more questions that came in, and those will be answered offline once the event is over by our panelists. So that'll be it for today's event. Please remember it will be archived at www.sdcexec.com. And I'd like to thank our panelists and sponsors, Scott Burns of Amber Road, Roger Gassman of Axway, Aaron Rudd of BROWZ, and David Hartman of Sparta Systems. I'd also like to thank all of you for attending and participating. I'm Barry Hochfelder, editor of Supply and Demand Chain Executive, and this concludes our web conference. Goodbye.